There's a problem. That was my no. I muted it. It should be totally off. You think it has to be down too? Or does it just have to be off?
Do that.
Okay. Okay. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the West Jordan City Council work session. We have Council Member Worthen and Council Member Jacob excused tonight. We're going to begin with a discussion on the proposed general plan goal, organization, and implementation. I believe Ms. Hanson is going to share some information.
Great. So first I wanted to talk about where the general plan is sitting right now. And it's currently with the Planning Commission. So as part of this process of creating a new general plan, there was a general plan committee made up of residents. And they spent a lot of time putting together this plan and creating goals. The Planning Commission is now reviewing that. And really the council shouldn't start picking at the general plan until they've made a recommendation, right? But there are a couple of things that we can do as staff to help prep review of the general plan with a little bit of your guidance, especially when it comes to the goals. Because as the legislative body of this city, you can help determine when these goals are funded. So it will take some collaboration as well with administration, because it's hard to fund goals when you're not sure whether administration has the capacity to take that on. So I'm hoping after we have a discussion, we can have a plan to say, okay, this is how the council wants to approach looking at these goals and more importantly, implementing them. Because I think a weakness of our general plan from 2012 is we're not sure what goals we achieved outright. Where I think with our next general plan, it would be more effective to say, hey, here's a historical section. These are some of the goals we completed in our 2023 general plan. Here's some we're still working on as a city. So that's what I'm hoping to see with some more organization and focus on the goals. One thing that I've done already is we had a lot of duplication with the goals across the different chapters. And part of that is just because the general plan is so intertwined, right? You talk about land use, you also need to talk about transportation. They all go together in creating a sustainable city. So I've already done that, but there's a few more things I think we can do to help really elevate the general plan. So one thing is deciding which goals are ongoing versus which goals are one time. And the way I define that is you want to think of a one-time goal as something that's a checklist. So for example, an analogy I use, it's like going to the grocery store and picking things up, right? You know, you need milk, eggs. Once you've picked it up, it's done. So a goal that I saw that would be an example of this was creating historic signage for sites in West Jordan that are historical places. Creating a sign itself is a one-time thing. Once we've figured it out, it's done, which is nice. An ongoing one would be making West Jordan a business-friendly city. So an ongoing goal is more subjective. It'd be like, all right, I've made this meal for my family. What do they think of how it tastes, right? It's a little more subjective. Some people are like, no, I prefer a little more salt. I prefer sweet. And so those type of goals, we need to have review in terms of like, okay, what micro things are we achieving to help create an overall goal? So I think splitting out the two helps in terms of reporting. And most of the one-time projects will need some sort of time assigned to them or certain funds. You can go ahead and move on to the next one. So here's an example. This is within the historical section of, it's like historic preservation. That's what I'm looking for. Chapter of the general plan. Go ahead, Alan, and click through. So we have our guiding principle, which is our overall like policy. So we want to preserve the character and significance of historical sites. Then to the left, we have kind of our long-term goals, which is identify, protect, and encourage preservation. And then to that, we have sub-goals to help us achieve those things. So as I was going through, something that I can do with the help of my fellow council staff members and with administration is individually work on those tiny goals to say, okay, this is one time, this is ongoing. So Alan, if you go ahead and click several times. So the first goal, we have seek federal, state, and other funds to identify and recognize historic sites within the city. That's going to be an ongoing goal. Keep going, Alan. And then submit formal application. That's a one-time thing. Develop historic sign, appropriate landscaping, intensive surveys, encourage preservation and enhancement of the historical museum. That's an ongoing one. And then one that I was like, this could be either, is carefully evaluate development that occurs near historic sites or structures to ensure that it is compatible with the historic character of the area. Because that will be something that just comes up as development comes in. So that's one way we can look at these goals, because it's easier to assign one-time goals to certain fiscal years if we know, hey, this is something we want to focus on during that year. Where ongoing, we might need like biannual reports from a department saying, okay, how are we done on seeking funds? Yes.
I just had this weird thought, and it'll be weird, so. I had this weird thought, but if we have these that are kind of the hybrid, one-time ongoing, like this one is evaluate the development that occurs during a historic site, we probably, I'm wondering if there's a better place to put those or cross-reference it so that when we're looking at a development, we have, these are the goals of the general plan on developments. And one of the things that we look at is evaluating it to see if it's compatible with the historic nature. So I'm wondering if on some of these, there's not a way to almost create a third category that, I don't know what we would call it, land use, bounce it against the goal for land use, whatever. But I'm wondering if we couldn't do that.
You're getting ahead, but don't worry, in a good way. So I was talking about this with Alan the other day, and something we were considering doing, and this is part of the presentation, as we assign these goals to different department with the advice of administration and with the help of administration, is assigning keywords to our goals and then assigning them by department. So if someone is going in and creating a request for council action, they can go ahead and select which department they're in, and then the goals show up for them to select from there. So if we have a land use issue and someone from Scott's department is filling out the RCA, they should be able to pull up those goals and highlight them and attach them to the RCA. It takes a lot of organizing, but we could do it. And then it would be good for the 5 or 10 years that the general plan has been in place. And if we complete a goal, then we can just remove it from the system. So we're getting there. And then another thing I wanted to put as a warning, I know Denise is online, is just because something is a one-time goal, that doesn't mean you're doing like one-time spending. So you can go ahead and move on, Alan. So for example, like with the historical signs, like you've created a sign, but in another, I don't know the lifetime of a sign, I'm sure Isaac could let me know, 30 years, you're gonna have to replace that sign. And if you're doing a sign that we can create at Public Works, it's probably gonna be less costly than like a monument that includes stone, concrete, or something fancy like that. So that's another thing to consider as you're planning out these goals. So I just wanted to clarify that there wasn't a confusion. Step 2, whose job is it anyways? And then I created a meme for this meeting because I felt it would be funny. I said, welcome to the general plan, where statutorily required planning is kept and plan implementation doesn't matter. And then I created an animation saying, we don't want to do that. So I think something that can be done, and this could be in the appendix of the general plan, and I think this can be done post-planning commission recommendation. And even you could approve the plan without this, but I think it would be more effective if you included this, is we can go through and assign these goals different departments to have assigned to them. Because it takes several departments to achieve plenty of these goals, and some of them will include the council as well. And this is just an example. I definitely will need the help of administration with the department heads and with Corbin to assign these, because I wouldn't dare to claim I know what happens in every department, especially since I've only been here for a year. But this was just a rough draft. So this is something, if administration is interested in participating in, that we can create for assignment, which I haven't told them about it. So we'll have to get some advice and help from them. And step 3, when should we allocate money to a project? And then I added a subtitle to this as well. And when does administrative staff have time to take on these projects? So this would be a whole work session in itself, if not a couple of work sessions. Like, I think it would be really great to have administration come in and have department heads come in and talk about, okay, here's the goals we've been assigned. Like, when can we as a department hope to approach this? And one thing we have to be careful about is we can't bind administration or future councils to spending money, right? This is all just a suggestion and this is all just a starting point. Obviously, things happen in life and there'll be costs to the city or something will happen in the city and events and things that you'll have to put goals to the side and say, this is where we need our money to be spent. And I think that's perfectly appropriate, but I think it helps the public have higher confidence in the city going a certain direction by saying, hey, these are our goals, this is where we're going, or hey, we had to take a back seat on these goals because of X, Y, and Z. And I think it strengthens your ability to show residents that their tax dollars are being used well. And then finally, how often should we review the implementation of the plan? So something to talk about is, do you as a council want to hear like twice a year or once a year on how the plan is going? Say we have a list of goals and be like, all right, this is what the goals we were hoping to achieve this year. Why didn't we achieve them, or did we achieve them? And talk about that. So that way you can also put a little check mark in your general plan and say, yep, this is something we got done, or oh, nope, we had to save this for later. So it's complicated. It's definitely not easy. Another thing I thought about was like financially, some of these goals are way more expensive than other goals, and not necessarily in monetary dollars, but time as well. Like I think one talked about reviewing the land use code, and that's going to take a lot of your time and a lot of the attorney's time. So things like that. So what I wanted from you tonight is kind of feedback and feedback from administration as well. If you go to my next slide, Alan, these are my main questions. Should council staff work with administrative staff to assign departments to goals in the general plan? And then is the council interested in brainstorming with administration on when goals should receive fiscal report and what years we want to see them in? And I honestly think the best way for us to do that is to present you with like an idea and then you have to critique from there instead of starting from scratch. But I kind of wanted to hear your feedback as a council, what you would like to see before we brought anything before you.
Okay, does anyone have something they'd like to share? Okay, I don't see lights going on, so
Go ahead first and then I'll.
so I'm just going to ask the questions, and if you'll indicate to me, should council staff work with administration? Is that something we want them to do, to assign departments goals in the general plan?
I think that's wise.
Okay, David?
Sure.
Yes, Chris?
I'm kind of on the fence.
Thinking, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 4 yes and 1 not sure. So I would say if administration is willing, then that's where the direction we'd like. Is the council interested in brainstorming with administration on when goals should receive fiscal support? Yes.
Yes, time and money, I want to make sure that we're respectful of staff's time if we're assigning them another duty, while also recognizing they have institutional knowledge as well, and time and money are what we're really working on. So I think a little more collaboration could hopefully help.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to be able to start to project out how we're going to spend money on some of these. If there's money that needs to be spent, we need to start planning and projecting.
Goals. Okay. Councilmember McConaughey.
And my thought was that should be integrated into the budget process, because as the budget's being brought back, being able to draw a direct line between what's being proposed and how that ties with council goals, and which are articulated through the general plan. I mean, that's kind of where I would expect that to fall, not necessarily something separate saying, okay, here's the budget, here's what we've decided we're going to do, which is something that's primarily come from staff, and then trying to figure out with what few dollars are left over, where do we implement council goals. Rather, staff should be able to clearly see what the council would like to do, and then as they're going through the budget process, draw the line. So during that budgeting process, we should see what needs to come up. So yes, but I think that's the budget.
Well, I think there can be both. I think the general plan probably has some benchmarks, timeframes, something. And then as each budget year comes up, I would agree with you that because the council set up our goals and some benchmarks for the future, that then, yes, somebody could see that and say, yeah, that's where we need to integrate that into the budget. So I would say it's kind of a hybrid, but I don't disagree with you. I think it has to be part of the budget, but I think this could help, 2 and 3 years out, taking a look at what the budget might be.
So what I'm hearing is, Cassidy, we have members that are in favor, um, but we feel like we should set some goals, and then we'd like administration when they're doing their budget process before the mayor's budget comes to us, to use those goals as guiding principles as to, if you're choosing, you have 10 extra dollars, whether you're choosing, oh, let's do what staff wants, or our council would like you to look at the goals first and decide how they align with the goals. Did I get that right, team? Yeah. Okay. All right. So do you have any other questions, Cassie? I know. I'll go to Corbin after Cassie.
I don't, but I'd love to hear what Corbin has to say.
Okay, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. This is a really good discussion. I like this a lot. I have a lot of thoughts, but let me try and summarize them to. We need a really, really healthy prioritization process. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there around that when should goals receive fiscal support. If you go back a couple of slides, there was the list of goals on the historical, the historical preservation. I love assigning specific departments, and I love assigning dates, right? Because we start to make the goals specific and timely and measurable. But we've got how many pages of goals in the general plan right now? 22 pages of the general plan are goals. We need a really healthy prioritization process so we know where to focus our very limited resources, like a Where Am I mobile app. How big a priority is that? And do you want to put tax dollars or staff time toward that? And how does that relate to all the other goals in the general plan? So I'm supportive of what Cassidy's proposing to you. I really like the comments I've heard from the council. I ask that when we get to really reviewing those goals, then we probably need to do a hard prioritization process and probably cull some of those goals and say, those are good ideas, but they're not our best ideas.
Well, and maybe they're still good ideas, but maybe they're not the goals for this general plan, right? Maybe they're ideas that sit in another place, not in the general plan.
Or maybe there's just a suggestion, a section in the general plan that these were the good ideas. And if the good idea somehow is able to be, so for example, we're talking about I'm going to take your example, Corbin, the Where Am I online mobile app to visit various locations in the city. If we're developing a city app that has some other things that we've talked about with, that Councilmember McConaughey's talked about with an app and those kind of things. Okay, we have that in the back of our mind that, okay, if we can integrate this good idea with something that we're going to do, then we can cross it off and say, that's what we wanted to do as part of the general plan. So I don't want to discard these good ideas, but some of them may be a lower priority to say, if we're working on a project and we're able to integrate X, Y, and Z, let's integrate them because those are things we wanted to see in the city. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share for this topic? Otherwise, we're moving on.
There just one thing, and this may be a thing that we need to look at for some of the goals, but I'm just going to mention it now. I think Cassidy, you and I have talked, but for example, in the agricultural land preservation, we don't really have any goals at all. And maybe the goal is just the council to look at, do we want to go down the road of agricultural land, agricultural corridor land preservation, transfer rights on properties and those kind of things. And so the goal may be just a matter of putting them on and some of these goals that you may even have may be just putting them on work sessions and deciding what the policy is. But one that I really want to see is that I noticed wasn't in the general plan was just something on agricultural preservation that even if it's just a work session and we talk about, do we want to protect the agricultural corridors, and we have those kinds of discussion. We're not going to be able to have all those kind of discussions to integrate with the general plan, right? General plan's a couple hundred pages long, and the right now the current general plan, if I understand it right, says we'll maintain agricultural land as long as possible. Well, do we want to take that general plan and make that stronger, better, faster, whatever, and say we want to protect agricultural land? The way we do that is transfer of development rights and some of those kind of things. But those are more, we're not going to solve those in reviewing the general plan and passing those. You know what I mean? And so I'm just wondering if there are other things that you also, as you're going through, like this goal that you saw with the historic sites, how many of those are council discussions on, do we want to do this in the city? What do we want to do? You know where I'm going with, am I rambling? Did that make any sense?
I think that makes sense. I think also as you begin reviewing the general plan, I think there'll be other council members that have certain things and issues that they care about and that their residents care about in their districts that they want included in the general plan. But I agree, I could add that as a subsection as well of goals, that things like the council should review this before going into greater depth. And I'm sure there's several goals that fit into that. And as I review them again, I'll make note of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. The next item on our agenda is discussion of amendments to Title 13-13-10 and 13-18-10E to adjust the tree clearance height for clearance and visibility. I'm going to go to Council Member Bloom first because this came forward from her and Council Member Worthen.
Yeah, this is in regards to the past conversation about a resident who was talking about the trees and the growing and all of that, and then realizing that any of our larger vehicles are still under 14 feet. So by this is coming from the residents, to adjust the code so it matches better and it protects the trees that we do have.
Perfect. Council Director Anderson.
Yes, and this was, as Councilmember Bloom brought up, this was sponsored by two council members to come to this event. Or to come to this conclusion of changing the tree height from 15 feet to 14 feet. When you look at the code, and just to be inclusive of the council, so the council is the custodian of the code, if I can use that phrase, there may be additional sections of the code related to just the tree height that you may want to look into. So if you'll bear with me for just a minute. We were asked by council leadership to prepare a list from risk on city vehicles that are damaged by trees. We can go back to fiscal year 18. And so I want to thank the risk department, Dell and Keenan, who put this together. This was sent to you previously. Since fiscal year 18, 7 city vehicles have been damaged by park strip trees. $3,000 is the total cost of actual vehicle repairs. $5,000 is the total estimated damage. Some repairs were deemed not worth repairing. The damage was either minimal or the price to fix was not deemed as an appropriate expense for the little damage. The city's insurance policy is $25,000, so all these repairs are under that, so it came out of the city's funds. And 2% of all city vehicle accidents are collisions with a park strip tree. And 9 feet 1 inch is the average height at which damage occurs. So this is just additional information. It's not suggesting to not go to 14 feet. That's just the average height at which damage occurs. Here's the number of accidents with park strip trees and the total cost to repair the city vehicles. And there's the raw data that was compiled at the direction of council leadership, where the accidents have occurred, and then the date, the height of the incident, and the location. So just a few of those. This one is 6 feet 8. It was the side mirror of the tiller truck. 10-wheel dump truck, and this one was one that was deemed not to repair, so it was estimated to cost $1,500, but the city chose not to repair the roof of this vehicle. So a few more here. This is a picture of a street sweeper, and one thing as you're discussing this that I think needs to be brought up, just again to give the council all the information that you need to make good decisions, right? Is in the springtime when trees bloom, they weigh heavier and the leaves or the branches bow a little bit more, and when you get an early fall snow, the leaves haven't fallen all the way, the softer limbs bow a little bit more down. So just as you're looking at all this information, there's also a question in the code, which I mentioned, I think, when this first came up. There's two measuring points in the code. One of the measuring point is a 15-foot measurement from the curb strip, and another measurement or park lane. And the other one is a 15-foot measurement from the travel lane. Roads crown a little bit to help with water runoff. So does the council want to come up with a consistent measuring point? Again, this is talking about our city code being objective rather than subjective. None of this is to try and convince the council that we should stay at 15 feet or not move to 14 feet. It's just additional information that I think the council needs before you just change a number, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I noticed all of those were well under the 15, well under 14 anyways, so regardless if it was 14 or 15, it would have still, they were still out of code and would have been damaged.
Yes, yes. And the other thing to take into account, I think the resident had compiled a list of various tree
cities.
heights from various cities. Some cities have 3-foot wide park strips, some have 5-foot wide park strip. Salt Lake City has 10-foot wide in older parts of the city. And that also plays into account. So again, having the council having all the information, if you want to move it from 15 to 14 feet, which is the height of the vehicle, does that number change at all when you're talking about trees like this picture here? Now these obviously are not to code, but you can see how the trees go lower because there's that early snow that's on them. You can see the street sweeper as I talk to the different departments to get this ready for you. The street sweepers are probably the vehicles that get closest to the trees, and also dump trucks when they're repaving a street, but that's not as consistent as a sweeper. But the sweeper gets close to the trees. So
Keep it on that picture.
anyway, I would like to know of those sections of code, do you just want to change it from 14 or 15 to 14? Do you have any other thoughts based on some of these examples with the insurance and the damage to city vehicles? Are there questions to make the code more objective versus subjective, different measuring points to make those measurements, those type of things? So this is now time for the council as a body to discuss how in-depth you want to make this.
Mr. Lee, did you have something you wanted to?
Yes,
say?
we have our urban forester here, Ty Nielsen. He's the biggest lover of trees in the city, and he's our expert. I just wanted to make sure you are aware, and he may have some valuable information for you to hear on this as well. I think Alan summarized most of the things well. I might chime in with one or two additional pieces of information.
Okay, we're going to have our discussion, and then if we have reason, we'll ask. Okay. Councilmember Pack.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I think it's always good to get more information upon which to make a better informed decision. So just curious, is the reason that it's 15 feet when you only need 14 is, as you mentioned, because of the bowing of the tree with blossoms or snow? So when you have a height of a work truck or an RV, I guess we're trying to talk about additional clearance for when that does bow over, because I certainly want to listen to residents.
I think instances like this, an inch won't make a difference for stuff like that.
Because the average height of the accident was 9 foot 1 inch,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So curious what the 15 versus 14 really does. What's the main
Well,
thought of selecting
Yeah.
1 foot difference?
For the residents, it was when it was adjusted to 15, they wanted to be able to safely trim their tree up to 15. So it takes a while for them to do that, to do it how they wanted to preserve it. So when it was a shock, they know she did the research. She realized most cities are at 14 and our vehicles aren't up to 14. So why the shock when, they can do that difference? In her mind, it was protecting the trees
Councilmember Green and then Councilmember McConaughey.
Where do I start? Um, there's a couple of things, and I think this picture actually depicts this very well. The center picture, and I since I knew this was on the agenda tonight, I paid very close attention to a lot of streets in my neighborhood and on down 90th South and a whole bunch of other trees going everywhere. And one of the difficulties with this ordinance is that it is currently, I'm going to say it's extremely subjective. And part of the reason why I say that is as a tree matures, and you can see even this tree in the middle, the tree's branches start to angle out, right? And on some trees, the branch goes out, and it goes out first before the tree goes up. I have trees in my neighborhood that extend out over the curb. They're at 4 feet at the 4 foot level because they're a new tree. The only way to prevent an overhang on a lot of these trees is to say it can't have an overhang, trim it up, trim it straight up the curb and call it good and mess up the tree. If we want to have trees that are growing in dry strips, there's going to be a natural overhang. And at what point does that natural overhang become the problem? And I have to say this. If we've had 7, 8, 10 accidents with city vehicles in the last 3 years, did we create a solution for a problem that didn't exist? I'm going to say it. Now, do I think that the tree on the left-hand side is causing a problem? Yeah, that's causing a problem not just for city trucks. That's causing problems for everybody who transits that road. Because my little 2-door convertible isn't going to get under that tree. You know, maybe somebody's go-kart might, but that tree's a problem. I can tell you that when I look at the tree that's off to the left of the truck in the middle picture, I don't see that as a problem. And it's I've heard anecdotally that after we went out with code enforcement and enforced the trees, there were some other residents that said, screw it, I'm just going to pull out my trees because I don't want to deal with code enforcement. Well, that's the wrong answer. I mean, that's just the wrong answer. So what's the right answer? Well, while I'm on my soapbox, I'm going to say this. And if this hurts somebody's feelings, I'm sorry. But it's utterly ridiculous that when somebody has a tree, they get fined $1,000 from the administrative law judge because their tree wasn't trimmed right. And I know of at least one, maybe two, where the ALJ, and they suspended it and said, get your tree trimmed. But the original fine was $1,000 plus an $1,150 inspection fee, plus a $150 inspection fee, that if they didn't trim up the tree, they were going to pay $1,150 or more for a fine because the tree wasn't trimmed according to code. And I saw the picture of the one where the lady's house was, she got fined $1,000 and there was a Jeep parked under it and it didn't have any problems. And so I'm also concerned. Judge Coons, I haven't reviewed the court for the records of the court upstairs, but I can guarantee you Judge Coons isn't giving $1,000 fines on first offense for DUIs in this city, because that's the max of a Class B misdemeanor. And I disagree with the fact that, do I think that we need a stick to help encourage people to get their trees trimmed? Yes. Do I think that it needs to be the same level as a Class B misdemeanor that's the same as domestic violence assault, same for DUI, same for marijuana possession or possession of drug paraphernalia or ad infinitum because we didn't trim our tree? No. And so part of me wants to make sure that as we review this code, we're taking a look at the overall fines and maybe even place a cap on ALJ on what he can fine, because honestly, it's not fair to you know, and without a subjective place to measure it, maybe it needs to be measured 4 feet from where the curb meets or for where the gutter meets the asphalt out, and then up. Whatever the case may be, we need to have some objective standards that anybody can go out and they can measure. And and like I said, I don't know what you do with the small trees that the branches automatically stick out. And then until that tree matures after 10 or 12 years, that's when it gets the canopy that you can trim it. And so I don't know what the answer to that is, but what we're doing right now is not good.
Thank you. Councilmember McConaughey.
I'll hold type for Director Anderson. Never mind. First of all, I think it's awesome that this council is having a conversation about what we can do to save trees versus what we've seen in neighboring cities that have just said, let's get them all out of park strips. No trees allowed. I'm much happier having this conversation. Rather than looking at the height of the city vehicles, I'm looking at what UDOT allows for commercial vehicles. UDOT commercial vehicle height is up to 14 feet. So I'm actually okay with the 15-foot restriction because it's not just city vehicles I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking about any other commercial vehicle that could be traveling down one of our roads. It's funny, Councilmember Green mentioned having another measurement point, and that's actually exactly where my mind went. Maybe we need to have something 4 foot off, but also maybe something based on overall height of the tree as it's growing or diameter. But as I'm thinking about that, I know that over my mom's neighborhood, there's some trees that are maybe 14 foot tall, but they're kind of like the weeping type of trees that drop down and they bell out over the street quite a bit. I'd like the idea of having, okay, at the curb, you need to have this much clearance at the curb, and then 4 foot out, you have to have a different amount of clearance. I don't know if that's the right number though. I hate throwing work at other people, but I'd be very interested in hearing what our resident Lorax has to say and what he might recommend. But my perspective at this moment that's very much subject to change is I'm okay with 15 in the street as long as there's a nice wide path that the larger vehicles can get through. Right up against the curb, I'd be okay with a little bit of leeway and flexibility for trees that are growing, kind of similar to what we have like on the sidewalk, 8 foot, maybe 8 foot off the ground, 4 foot off the back of the curb. But between that 4 foot and the 15 foot off the curb, it has to hit 15 feet. I don't know what those numbers should be. I don't know what's good for trees. I don't know if it changes based on type of tree, but I'd be open to hearing thoughts and suggestions. So if you're open to it, I'd love to hear brainstorm.
I want to save him for last. So we're going to finish and then we'll bring him. Okay.
I may have more thoughts after, so
Okay. That's fine. Everyone's had a turn except me. I'm going to take my turn. And then we'll have the questions. We can ask the questions and then we can come back to anyone that has more questions. Here are my thoughts. We live in a desert and trees are important to help both with heat islands and clean air. We want trees in our city, both for aesthetic value and ecological benefits. While we've had a couple of tree issues each year with city vehicles, they have not been huge, mostly cosmetic. I understand that for a few days of the year, branches can be even lower due to snow or, I guess, blossoms. Just like drivers should use more caution with snow in roads, we should also ask staff to be cognizant of lower branches when it's spring or snowing. Prior to changing the tree height, I had 0 complaints from residents. Since the change in code, we have had 2 significant ones. In addition, when the city repaved the roads in my neighborhood, several neighbors got notices and at least 2 chose to cut the trees out, as it was too much damage to the tree to cut what was being asked, and the tree would most likely die and for sure be unsightly. I am also troubled by the amount we are assessing for branch overhang, and it is my opinion that we are determining tree height not inconsistent ways, and it needs to be addressed. How we measure them, from where, and what that looks like, so that when they're being measured, everybody does it the same. For me, I want to make the work of staff smooth, but not at the expense of residents and the overall health and safety of the city. When we fine an elderly resident $1,000 fine for a tree height, I don't feel that we are looking out for the residents. And again, if we want trees, we might have to figure in there will be some errors and hence some minor damage. I would support a motion to change the tree height as long as it includes from the height where we'll be measuring it and how we will make it consistent. Those are my thoughts. I'm very much in favor of lowering it to 14. It makes sense to me based on the data that we've been given. Ty, would you please come up and answer the two that I've heard so far that were consistent is why the 15 foot and baby trees, how are we going to handle that? Because we've heard it from both ends of the dais. You know, if you've got a mature tree, that's different than a tree that you're trying to get to grow. It's going to look different. So how do we handle those? And what if we take it to 14? Push the right side.
Side.
There you go.
I see the red light now. Okay. Usually I kind of a loud mouth anyway. So first off, how do we handle young trees? First off, plant the right tree in the right place. Trees have their own makeup. Some of them want to be on an umbrella. Some want to be ex-current. And if we have to sit and prune an umbrella to be an ex-current tree, we're going to be fighting it its whole life, and it will be stressed, and it's not a good thing. We, on our current ordinance, have a street tree list, which is current and available. It's not all inclusive, but it's of the trees that we know that work in park strips, they are listed. So you don't want to put sycamores in a park strip, even if it's an 8-foot park strip and you live in the sycamores.
Well, you might want to, but it wouldn't be.
You might want to, but it's not a good thing for the health of the tree. And so you want to plant the right tree in the right place. And unfortunately, but fortunately, home ownership has its responsibilities and duties. And just like a dog or a cat or a horse or a tree or a child, you've got to train them when they're young. And many times, you've got to have your lower branches so that you can get your taper on your trunk, which is good and healthy for your tree. And you'll have to leave your lower scaffolding branches until they are of age where they can move up and be concerned. Now, the point that I was hearing is that where are we measuring? And actually where we measure is where the curb and the asphalt meet. That's where we measure from, because that's where, if we were to change it, that's where the equipment, when we resurface or whatever, that's the point where it's at the highest, and then the curb actually is a little bit lower so that water can run. And so we measure from where the cement and the asphalt meet, and that's where we measure. Now, to answering the why 15 feet is, well, we have like our flowering pears. They're the first ones to wake up and the last ones to go to bed, which means if you have a storm late or early, whichever time of the year, you go out there right today and they're still in full leaf, which means any kind of precipitation, especially snow or anything frozen, they are going to sag. They also have a very poor branch attachment, which means that when they get this snow load or load of ice, they do a lot of self-pruning. And they're also probably 60% of our urban forest are flowering pears, because they're, they got those pretty flowers in the spring. You don't want to bring them in your office to smell them,
because they smell like dead fish. But they look good outside. And so they're way overplanted, and there are some of them that are 30 and 40 years old that they just grow, and they've never been trained. They've never been pruned. They were planted and watered and not maintained or trained to be able to be in a park strip. And so the 15-foot was so that we have access when the equipment comes. I don't know if you guys remember when Redwood was done, and they like remarked it, and so they took their grinder and they ground everything and remarked. They didn't change the road except for they narrowed each lane, and the equipment that they used to do the grinding, you could see on the outside about 9.5 feet up. The exhaust from it burnt every tree back 3 feet and about 6 inches. It's hard to be an Italian talker with a microphone. And so that's why we picked the 15-foot, is it allows us to have some variance where a 15-foot does not really provide any discretion. It's too hard fast, and if we do the 14, we're going to have more damage to the trees first off, and then most of the times they're little wispy branches, and they just do a lot of slapping. In the prior city that I worked in, driving in a truck, it hit me in the eye because it hit the window and then slapped me in the eye. I didn't have glasses at the time, and it hurts when it's cold and you get slapped by a tree. Had it been to code, then it wouldn't have even slapped me or the truck. Did I answer the questions?
I didn't hear anything about baby trees and how we take
Training
care
them.
of that.
So
Right.
planting the right tree in the right place.
So how do we as a city help our residents do that? Because in neighborhoods where flowering pears have been planted, oftentimes that's because
Majority
the
of the time.
developer has given those trees to be planted. We don't have anywhere on our website, when I looked for trees, of what could go in park strips that was easy to find. Now,
They-
maybe it's there now.
Oh,
I haven't looked
well,
recently.
if
But
you
we
say
have got to do
easily
stuff
found, yes.
for our residents, because in my opinion, we're here to serve the residents, and one-off accidents and one-off issues isn't how I want to guide what we do. And don't feel picked on about trees, because the people that I serve with have said personal rights several times, and I feel this is one of those issues. For me, I'd rather we not allow work trucks in neighborhoods to park. I'm sick of semis in my neighborhood, but I was in the minority on that vote. On this vote, I feel strongly that a resident has come to us. So my last question for you is, how can we make 14 feet work? I think we can, based on the data I've seen. So how could we make that work? Because yeah, if we're coming down Redwood to change the street, that's one thing. But in most neighborhoods, we're not doing that. So how do we make 14-foot work?
So 14 foot. So in order to make a tree that is existing and non-compliant, to make it compliant, we have to prune it. And pruning invigorates growth. And so the tree is going to respond. Most of these trees throughout our city have been neglected. And pruning is going to be like giving them a shot of fertilizer, and they're going to go, oh, this feels so good. We can get some new growth out, and they're going to come out even better than before, which means they're going to be in the way more. And we'll have no variance. We will be hitting them because of vehicles. We've even had not just city vehicles, but we've had campers, trailers People they've gone on vacation and they come home and they're campers. They hit the trees and we've sustained damage on their, the tree of course gets it, but the campers too. And so it's not just by, if we were to restrict city vehicles from residents or semis, almost everybody's truck's lifted to a semi size. I mean, okay, I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of lifted trucks and everybody's got these huge RVs. So 14 foot would require a lot more maintenance, more regular. My urban forest goal for maintaining street trees is a 5 to 7 year rotation. There's 2 of us, and it takes about 5 to 7 years for us to prune a street and then get throughout the rest of the city before we come back to that same street and prune it again. Of course, we get complaints, and so we end up not being able to follow our routine. Then we have the city divided up into 6 sections so that we can do section 1 through 6 at a time. We end up putting fires out because we prune the one, the trees respond, and they've responded well, and we have to go back before their scheduled re-pruning. So 14 foot, we could do it, but it would mean a lot more regular and closer window of pruning.
So why if the park strip is really ours, which it is, right? Legally, where's legal? Yes, right?
Yep, right away.
And it's our forester's job to prune them, then how are we fining residents for not having their trees?
So
I'm confused. If it's
by
we
ordinance,
either fine them because they have to help take care of it, or we don't.
by
if-
ordinance, it states that the trees, the adjacent property owner is to maintain and care for these trees by
Okay,
ordinance.
so then they will be the ones responsible to keep them up to 14 feet.
Yes,
Okay, so
residence
then I don't
trees, but
see the issue.
they currently have not been maintained at all.
Some, not all.
Majority.
Some people take care of their trees.
There are
Oh,
there
yeah.
are some, not all of them.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I didn't see whose light went on first. Maybe you guys did, but I think Pamela was
Yeah, she
on
was.
and then she was off. So
Yeah,
let's go to
because
her
I wanted to
first.
hear better. My question that I'm coming out of all of this is that the developers are planting the wrong trees, and then everybody else is paying for it. That's what I'm getting out of this. With that list of approved trees, are these developers not using it? When I did I was in the snow plows last week or the week before, and their biggest problem was the new developments west of SR 111 has planted these trees that's giving them issues, and that's a fairly new development. So what went wrong? Why are we planting trees? Why are we not being more strict on what trees we're planting with these neighborhoods? Are they just seeing the list and doing whatever and hoping they get away with it?
So, new developments are reviewed,
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of if it's an HOA.
Which most all of them are.
Yeah, then that is theirs.
Well,
They do have the list, but we don't.
So
We
there's the
don't
problem.
inspect them. They don't. But if they are the cities, then
So so now we're finding where the problem is
the,
with the new
the tree types
developments.
are being looked at
Mm-hmm.
for the ones that will be ours.
but ours, as far as roads we have to plow, Mr. Langsford, would you like to come up and help with this discussion? And then we still have a couple of more items, so I think we're gonna go like 5 more minutes and we may need to bring this back. Is that okay? All right.
Councilmember Bloom, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of the enforcement that's happened recently is out west, where the developers did initially install all that. With the council's recent update to the landscape ordinance, we no longer require street trees. So for single family on local roads, we do require it on big collector and arterial roads, but those we can watch. Ty reviews those. The trouble or the problem that we may have going forward, a resident can come in and plant a tree anytime they want. So that's, I think we'll have less issues now with the updated code, but we'll still have, I think, challenges.
Okay, I think we need to continue this discussion because there's a lot to it, and there may be stuff that maybe Ty wants to bring back. There may be stuff that
Yeah.
So,
admin wants to. So let's bring this back.
okay, there might be a little bit of time on the 21st. Then we switch and have the work session on the 18th of January. That one already has potentially 4 items.
Oh, I had 6.
Well, let's see if we can put it on the 21st because I
Okay.
feel like we need to move on.
Okay, we'll do
Okay.
that.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
All right, the next one is discussion regarding facility use policy framework. Who, Mr. Anderson?
That would be me. So, the attorneys are working on a facility use and also the fee waiver. You remember we talked a little bit about the fee waiver. These kind of go hand in hand. In this form of government, the facility use policy document is actually prepared by administration. However, the council has responsibility over 2 segments of it, and this is the framework. So you have the framework of space. What is defined as public space? What is maybe contract partner space and employee space? And then also the framework of city speech. What can be displayed in the public space? Mr. Wallace sent an email to the council explaining a case in Boston where a city allowed entities to fly a flag on the city's flagpole, and there was a religious entity that wanted to fly a flag, and the city told them no because it's a separation of church and state, and the Supreme Court ruled that if you allow one, you allow all. So as you're talking about the public space specifically, and you're talking about what can be displayed in a public space, any regulations that parameters that you would like to have in a facility use guide, if it's good for one, it's good for all. Since I've been here, we have had an individual that contacted the council office, and I referred him to the mayor, who wanted to display a flag within City Hall. So that would be part of the city speech. Public space, there was a question when, I can't remember which one of you brought up, when Test Utah was in the parking lot of City Hall. Is that something that needs to be included? Public space, for example, if you identified the community room in the remodeled City Hall as public space, then if it's open to one entity, it's open to all entities. If you wanted to have the gallery of council chambers, which will have now that dividing wall to separate it from the dais, if you wanted that to be open as public space, if it's open to one, it's open to all. Tonight, as part of this discussion, we have Dave Quayle, who is a First Amendment specialist attorney, and of course, Mr. Wall, the city attorney, to answer any legal questions you have. What we would like to do tonight, knowing we still have one item to go, is kind of, you have parks, you have parking lots, you have rooms at City Hall, you have Pioneer Hall, all of those places. Do you want to define those as public space, open to one, open to all? And then do you have any parameters you want to have around city speech? What's allowed in cities, in city spaces, I should say.
You're not asking for much, are you, Mr. Anderson? I do have a question. Is the museum also, I mean, that's ours, so.
Right, you have a contract, so you could talk about it as contract partner space,
Okay,
things along those lines.
okay,
right?
so what exactly do you want to know from us?
Can I ask a couple of questions first?
Sure.
Maybe Mr. Quayle can answer these better. So get up here and get ready for the microphone. So one of my first questions.
If you want peanuts, push left. If you want to talk, push right.
That's right. Alan uses
You're
the
not
term.
on.
Alan uses the term public space. One of my questions is, for example, the city park, Veterans Park out here, can we define areas in Veterans Park as traditional public forums, quasi-public forums, or a non-public forum, or is the whole park a public forum?
Well, generally speaking, the whole park, excuse me, the whole park will be a public forum. For a limited public forum, you can work in areas such as Boweries or sports fields where you could limit access to those. Now, to keep them truly a limited public forum, you're going to have to lock those off when they're not in use. Otherwise, the public can come in, the public can come out. You can rent them a Bowery for your family, birthday party or whatever, and then have exclusive use of that area. But for First Amendment purposes, it's all about the ability to exclude.
You see, the reason why I asked that question was I'm thinking specifically about like the Veterans Monument out here is that, and I'm going to say it, and yes, I understand the Supreme Court decision and I live with it, but we have the Veterans Memorial. The last thing that I want is some crazy church out protesting because, veterans deserve to die type thing in that Veterans Memorial. And, that's why I ask about the limited public forum. Could we restrict something like the actual monument itself as a limited public forum so we can say, no, you can't have crazy activities inside this particular area, that before we talk about public space?
I have a question on that. With our city parks having like a 10 p.m. close, would that count as would that count because we already have the hours?
That's a reasonable time, place, manner restriction.
Yeah, I would agree with Councilmember Green. The fact that a park closes at 10 p.m. would allow the police department to cite individuals for being in a location where they are not supposed to be, whether they're playing Frisbee or there to engage in political protest. But while the park is open, anyone is allowed to come and go. That's what the Supreme Court's called the traditional public forum. It's basically sidewalks and parks are going to be the quintessential examples of where you can engage in unrestricted speech.
So I have a question because we had this occur where a group came in because they have the right to be anywhere and they wanted to go into some areas that we didn't want them in, right? So how do we accomplish that? Like South Valley Sanctuary, they wanted to go into that, but that's really not appropriate. And they're going to have space when the city hall is renovated, is done. So is that a contract partner space? How do you, are we allowed in any way to restrict access to areas to keep staff safe, to keep, what's the rules? How do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to restrict, it can be as simple as an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that says employees only beyond this point. Then we are setting a restriction on who can go there. So in public facilities, you can have, in one building, say City Hall, you could have non-public space. That would be employees only, right? The public is not allowed to go into that area, let alone go in there for speech. You can have limited public fora, which are spaces maybe such as the community room, where to go in there, you need to rent it and have a contract or an agreement where you're not going to trash the place. You have to do a deposit, whatever the restrictions may be. But it's a place where you need to rent it. Not everybody can just come and go. Now, if you create those spaces, you still have to follow the come one, come all. You can't not rent it to a group you don't like their viewpoint, that sort of thing. You can't rent it to the Boy Scouts, but not the Girl Scouts, or whatever the case may be. But you can restrict people's ability to go into that space. There's also could be traditional public fora. That would be the ability for someone to come into a council chambers. And there's case law where they can have, you know, a shirt chastising the city council or a political position, and that's all going to be okay. There's public comment period. So within one structure, you can have every single kind of free speech space or fora. So it really will depend on looking at the park or the facility, the building itself, and deciding what spaces you want to use and how you would like to restrict those.
Okay, so is what we're being asked is to weigh in on where we think we should have these different places? Is that?
Is that correct,
that-
Mr. Anderson?
Yes, it's, for example, the parking lots hadn't been included before. Does the council want to have city parking lots be able to be rentable? Are there restrictions on rooms you don't want to be rentable?
Okay, unless one of my fellow members feels differently, I kind of feel like I would like to have this go back to administration and have them bring forward what they feel like, because I don't, you know, like the passport area, we have to let the public come in, right? But there are areas that I absolutely feel like we need to say it's employees only for the safety of records, for the safety of our employees. So I would like to see that come to us so that then we could weigh in, because at this point I think it's too open and we might not have all the information we need. Are we all good with that?
Well,
Councilmember McConaughey?
So
Because we can change it, right?
my thought, the one thing that concerned me isn't so much like the type of speech or that may be happening in some of these places, but the types of activities and potential impact on the facilities. If somebody wants to rent a room at City Hall for an activity, it may work just fine. Let me back up. I'm thinking in particular about Pioneer Hall. It's an older building. It's somewhat fragile. I don't think it's the best place to have activities that could be a little bit more raucous. So trying to find a way to limit those types of activities and make sure that they're in the appropriate places so that we don't risk damage to Pioneer Hall. I know we've had other issues where portions of City Hall were used and it resulted in damage to the building there. Those are the kinds of concerns that I have as we're looking at the facility use policy, not so much the speech. It's not really been an issue in the past, but damage and maintenance has been. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And Pioneer Hall really stuck out as the one that I'd like to see limitations on types of activities and the impact that they can potentially cause to an irreplaceable facility.
And those can be accomplished from a First Amendment perspective. If you're regulating an activity that could damage a facility, you're regulating not the speech, you're regulating the manner in which you can use the facility. As long as that's content neutral, you say, you know, no loud music if it's a wedding, loud music's okay if it's a theater production. That's problematic. But if you just say no loud music, that would be okay. So we can address some of those as the policy is developed.
I was going to say, I thought that part of the goal of having this discussion was to get some basic feedback before we spend a lot of staff time running down rabbit holes that nobody knows that we want to do or not. So that was part of the reason for this discussion. From my perspective, I'll just throw out a couple of things. I believe we had a serious problem with Test Utah in the parking lot, and I think the parking lots have to be included as our public facilities, and they need to be included on what can be rented and how it can be rented, and those kind of things for long-term use. I think we need to address when we're talking about parking lots and those kind of things. Are food trucks allowed to set up in City Park? That's because it's public space, it's public forum. You know, what are the regulations that we can do for those kind of things? So I think we need to look at those. I'm also a little bit, I think there are some buildings in this city that I think that we just declare as non-public space. I actually have some heartburn that we rent out. I have to count the fire station, Station 53, that some of those rooms are available in Station 53. I would rather just have all the fire stations, the public works building. I would, and maybe with the exception of this building, or this room, I'd just as soon declare most of those buildings as non-public space so that, the public doesn't have an expectation to go in there and be able to rent those rooms.
Mr. Anderson.
So what I'm understanding is that the administration come up with a draft facility use policy, the mayor's office, and then bring that back to council to make sure that the framework and the parameters that you want are in it.
Yeah.
Is that-
So I think it should be a high level, not a detailed, right? That's what we'd like back so that it can then be more of a constructive discussion because we've heard, and I've heard that before about Pioneer Hall and the parking lot is a legitimate issue. It was a unique time in history, but what if we have that 100-year flood every 3 years now? Something we need to look at. Mr. Lee.
So I was just going to make a request or a clarifying statement on something Mr. Anderson said. What I'm hearing is not bring back the whole policy. Rather, what we're going to bring back is here's what we recommend as these spaces for this type of use and this type of speech. You can get your feedback on those
Yes,
issues.
please. That's exactly what I think would work best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I throw one more?
You have
Is
2
and I
minutes.
think this would help, Rob. Maybe you can shake your head on this one too. Is, for example, we have city speech, right? And the question is, what areas are appropriate for city speech? I'm thinking, for example, the Field of Flags. Is that city speech, or are we allowing somebody else to do that? And so as we address the policy, I want to make sure that, we don't have somebody come in and say, hey, I want to have a whole bunch of a field of flags for some other kind of that message that we don't want. And so as you're looking at that, Corbin, maybe there's a way that with Mr. Quayle and Mr. Wall that you can look at that particular piece and see if there's a way to keep us out of trouble with that.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Next up, we have discussion on landlord tenant agreements for city utilities. I think this was Councilmember McConaughey.
Yes, Councilmember McConaughey and Councilmember Pack are the sponsors, and
Okay.
Miss Steck from Administrative Services is online.
Is online,
should you
and we got, oh shoot, now his name, Tyler Aiken. Thank you. Tyler Aiken sent us, or Alan forwarded us his information, a letter, right? Is that
and
where I got it?
Yes, and I know time
So.
is tight, but we can go a little bit longer. We don't
Yes, we
really
do need a potty break in between though. So, okay, so we have about 10 minutes, maybe 15. So, Councilmember McConaughey, do you want to introduce?
So just to clarify, when you say 10 minutes, maybe 15, so we're going to 6:52 to 6:57?
At 6:55, we're going to be done.
Okay. Given the time and how rushed this is going to be, and also, I mean, I know Councilmember Pack and I were suggesting that we have a conversation about it, but there's a pretty lengthy, or quite a bit from the treasurer that I didn't actually see any of that until the agenda was published. So I'm not sure that there's time to really get through that.
Okay, would you like to have it on a future work session?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Anderson, can you put that? It will probably not come until the second work session, which is the second Wednesday in February, correct?
3 months?
You've
Well,
actually,
because next meeting we're full. The first
Next-
work session is
next
for
meeting you're
things.
gonna have two.
Oh,
you
okay,
could-
so we
you
could
do
put it
on
there.
the 21st, and then the following one, you're at 4 right now.
Did you already add that we're going to bring trees back next time?
Yep, that's
That
the
is
two.
too. Oh, okay, so let's bring it back next time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there is nothing else, then we will adjourn from our work meeting and resume at 7 p.m.
I'll move to adjourn.
We have a motion by Councilmember Green, a second by Councilmember Bloom. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.